You're listening to Expertly Said, a podcast on the art and impact of communication. I'm Kristen Sweeney, founder and CEO of Every Little Word. My guest today is Brian Krogh, founder of BK Presentations and lead facilitator at Leadership Link. Brian's a public speaking coach who helps technical experts present their expertise like a leader. He specializes in transforming complex information and data into compelling narratives that resonate with diverse audiences. Brian honed his communication skills in sales at a Fortune 100 company, as a pastor for 20 years, and as an adjunct professor at Boston University's College of Communication. He's helped hundreds of executives and rising executives craft compelling messages and deliver them with authority and authenticity. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Kristen. I'm glad to be here.
Really excited to get into this conversation today. I would love to start by just talking about that broad range of experience. And can you share a little bit more about connections you've seen between being a pastor and being a sales professional, or how those, maybe the differences have kind of shaped your perspective on communication today?
Yeah, well, what I would say is across those different experiences, I have the benefit of learning to communicate in a number of different environments. So starting out of graduate school and being in sales at a large global corporation, learning to sit in boardrooms and conference rooms and message things in a way that they make sense to the person in front of you, or they're compelling enough for someone to sign a contract or make that sale. And then moving on working as a pastor, there's a number of contexts in which you learn to speak. One, you're leading a team of people, so you have employees that you're working with. I'm also working with individuals at some of the most dramatic and important moments of their life. So they're when marriages happen, they're when loved ones pass away. And so learning to communicate in those high stakes, emotionally intense environments as well. And then communicating from the stage. So sometimes there's 100 people in the room, sometimes there's 1,000 people in the room, and how do you communicate in that environment? So put that all together then with being an adjunct professor and trying to lecture for 3 hours in the evening and keep people's attention. And that's what I would say I appreciate about the experience, is learning how to communicate across a number of environments and do it in a way that you're connecting with people and you're saying things in a way that it's helpful and people remember.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, right? Is that there's probably a core set of what makes good communication skills, but then so much of it is context dependent. Who are you talking to? Is it one-on-one, small group, arena kind of presentation, and being able to kind of navigate that and make the right decisions based on all of those different factors. It sounds like that background is really giving you that agility.
Yeah, I think it's helpful. And one of the things that I've learned and continues to be surprising to me is it is a core set of skills that translate to the different environments. Mm-hmm. So whether you are on stage with 1,000 people or you are one-on-one with another person, there's some basic skills that will serve you well in both of those settings. And so you can use them regardless of where you find yourself.
That makes a lot of sense. It's how I think about, we are kind of two sides of the same coin. I think we serve a lot of the same audience in some ways. But at Every Little Word, we focus primarily on written communication. And I too see there's a core skill set in writing that can manifest in a lot of different ways for a lot of different audiences. But that those foundational skills really do translate well. Can you share a little bit more about the work that you're doing today, and who you're doing it kind of with and for?
So most often I'm working with people who are technical experts in their field. So both in tech arenas where people are developing products, they're deep into whether they're working with AI or building some sort of software as a service product. And then also in biotech and pharma, where I'm typically working with researchers and scientists. Although one thing I say is it doesn't matter what your role is in an organization, you are an expert to someone. So if you're in payroll, You could be talking to a molecular biologist who has their PhD, but you're the expert in payroll. They don't understand taxes. They don't understand how the payroll software works. So you are the expert in that situation. How do you then communicate out of that in a way that the other person understands you? Almost always, I'm helping people work cross-functionally within their organization. And so how do we take what you do really well and what you know, and how do we say it to people that are not the expert that you are in a way that they find it compelling and clear? And then also, how do we help you be confident as you say it?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that it it must be interesting. I'm curious to know some of the challenges that these folks face, because you're kind of putting them in this maybe not externally public facing role, but something more public than what they're used to, right? If they're used to kind of hiding out in a lab all day or being like heads down working on a software product. Where do you kind of begin with someone who has the need to present or speak in this way, even inside their organization, and doesn't have a background of being on stage? Or, I have a performance background myself in musical theater, and I think there are a lot of times where I don't stop to appreciate that that's just kind of ingrained in me. So if I need to speak at a PTA meeting or lead a workshop or something like that, like there's some level of familiarity and comfort with being in that role. But I can imagine a lot of the folks you work with, this is a brand new experience for them.
It is. And one of the things that continues to surprise me is when I work with the new employee, the individual contributor, they often will say to me, I'm very nervous. I don't usually like to do this. I don't enjoy being up in front of people. And I understand that completely. But what surprises me is, for example, this summer I worked with a woman who is an Ivy League professor, has a TEDx talk with over 1 million views, wrote a book, had an article in the New York Times just last week. And when we were getting ready for her talk in June to about 200 people, she said to me, I really don't like doing this. This isn't something I enjoy. And then 3 executives I worked with at a tech company this summer, getting ready for their global customer summit, about 1,500 people in the room. All 3 of them, who came from very large tech companies, said to me, this is not my favorite part of this job. And so, to your point, it doesn't necessarily change just because you have advanced in your career. This feeling that I don't feel comfortable in this space. I don't love this space. And so, one of your questions is where do we start? Is that what you were asking me? Yeah.
I'm curious, like, if there's a difference between what skills people think they need to acquire and what skills you think they need to actually acquire.
That's a good question. One of the biggest shifts that I help people understand, or I try to convince them of, is we can't become great communicators by working from the outside in. So if we get rid of all your filler words, and we help you make better body movements, you make better eye contact, whatever the case may be, that's not going to internally change how you're feeling about this skill, or necessarily make you more compelling as a speaker. We have to start from the inside out. And so when I work with people, I say, we're going to help you communicate your expertise like a leader. That's different than communicating your expertise like an expert. Every expert I've ever worked with knows how to communicate their expertise like an expert. If there are 2 chemists in the room, I never have someone reach out to me and say, our chemists can't talk to each other. They can do that. But all the time I have people reach out to me and say, hey, we have someone from in pharmacology who's part of a global project team. And when they talk to everyone on that team, we can't understand what they're saying because they're still communicating their expertise like an expert. I want to help them communicate that like a leader. And so there's an internal shift that begins to happen. And there's 3 places where we start to make that shift for each person.
What are they?
So when we go to communicate, there's something inside of us that feels pressure to be three things. We feel pressure to be perfect. Even now, coming into this podcast recording, I feel that pressure.
Oh, same.
Same.
We were chatting
right?
about
you
it
feel
before,
that pressure.
right? Yeah, 100%.
You feel that pressure to be perfect. And then there's another pressure that every person I've worked with, and I know this because I feel it internally, is not just the pressure to be perfect, but the pressure to be impressive. That I need to say things in a way that people sit back and are blown away by either how smart I am or how articulate I am. So there's this pressure to be perfect, and there's this pressure to be impressive. And then there's this mindset that it's my job to be an informer, that I bring details and information and I say it to the audience, and then they take that home. The challenge with that mindset, that when I speak, my goal is to be a perfect, impressive informer, is perfection is impossible. You will,
Yeah.
If you want to have tons of public speaking anxiety, just hold yourself to perfection. That will increase that anxiety for you. And this idea that I need to be impressive, the challenge is the workplace and the world is full of impressive people. It's really hard to hit that goal, to say, I'm going to be the most impressive person in the room. And if you want to go after that, you can, but it probably will lead to you speaking to your audience in a way that they don't really feel like they understand you, and throwing so many details at them that they feel overwhelmed. And then this idea that I'm supposed to be an informer. The challenge there is, think about all the talks and meetings and presentations that you've heard in the last year. Now think about how much you remember and how much you've kept with you. Standing up in front of a room and just giving people information so that they remember it for a week, 3 months, 6 months is very ineffective. So you're shooting for something that isn't going to give you the results that you're looking for. So we have to shift from being perfect, impressive informers. We have to shift away from those things to something else.
Yeah, I love that. And I do see that as kind of one of the big differences in spoken communication versus written. And I know to some extent that may depend on what kind of a learner you are, but I think written communication has its limitations. Certainly, it doesn't have the kind of personal charisma and passion that can come through in spoken communication. It does allow, in some cases, for more detail. And so I think that kind of goes back into this context of what are you able to most effectively communicate given the medium you're using and the situation that you're in. Is it storytelling? Is it one takeaway? Like, how do you help people think about what they really need to get across if it's not all the facts and figures?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think this storytelling is such a buzzword in communication right now. And no scientist is going to get up on stage and say, once upon a time there was a molecule, and it wasn't any molecule. This was a strong molecule. So the idea that you're going to turn your data and research into this compelling story in your team meeting, I think falls flat with a lot of people, or even at the scientific conference, that idea can fall flat. But the principle that's being talked about there is important. So what I help people do, and what I ask them to do, is to say, if we're going to move away from this perfect, impressive informer, and we're going to embrace what the spoken word or spoken communication medium offers, instead of being perfect, let's shoot for being present. And instead of trying to be impressive, let's try to be helpful. And that's where I think that shift is where we get to what I hear you asking about, is we're not asking, what are all the things that I could say on this topic? I'm asking, who's the person in front of me, or who's the group of people in front of me? And I'm working backward and now saying, well, what do I know that would be most helpful for these people to know based on who they are and where they're coming from? And then that final one is, rather than being an informer, we're going to move to being an advisor. So I'm now saying I'm present with this group of people. I'm going to offer them something that's truly helpful to them, not just try to impress them. And then I'm going to advise them. If I was in their shoes and I was working in their function, or I was a part of this group and this audience, what do I suggest they do? And what do I recommend they do? And I find when we make that shift from the perfect impressive informer to the present helpful advisor, that mindset shift makes a dramatic impact on how confident somebody is and how clear they are when they speak.
I think it's a lot easier to set yourself, one, to relax the standard of perfectionism and say, just be here. Being present is hard enough on its own, honestly.
Yeah.
But then that switch from impressive to helpful, I think about this a lot when we talk about content, of like, what are the things that you can actually control, and what are things that we sort of describe, but actually it's not up to us. It's up to our audience to feel that way or have that reaction. Like, we can hope they feel a certain way. Even impressive to me kind of speaks to that. Like, you can try to impress someone, but ultimately I'm not sure whether you get to decide, right, if you were impressive or not.
Right.
Something like helpful feels a little more like in your control, I guess.
Yeah. It's attainable. I can be helpful. I know it's really hard for me to be impressive, but I can shoot for helpful and try to reach that.
Yeah, definitely. And then you said the third one was
this shift from being an informer to being an advisor.
An advisor. I'm curious if you have an example of what that might look like, or with a client where they were kind of advising someone else inside, or a group inside their organization based on their personal expertise.
So advisors do a couple of things, I think. One is they are able to set the context of whatever it is they're presenting. So advisors understand where people are coming from, what they do in their function, what they do in their job, and they are able to set the context of, I'm going to share these details with you, and here's the reason why I'm sharing them. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and we just started school this week here in the Boston area. And every morning when she gets up during the school year, she's done this for years and continues to do it. I will say something like, "It's time to get on our shoe. It's time to get your shoes on." And she will come back to me with the same 3-letter question that she has asked me over and over and over again. And that question is,
why?
Why? Why did we do this?
She must be talking to my 6-year-old.
That's right.
They're on the same wavelength.
Every morning, it blows her mind that we would have to eat breakfast and get our shoes on and be out the door at a certain time. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? I don't think that question ever leaves us as adults. So every team meeting, people are walking in and they're going, why are we doing this? Why do we do this? Every Tuesday we have this meeting. Why? There's a conference. Why are we at this conference again? Why are we in this project meeting? People are constantly asking themselves that question. We forget. And advisors are able to walk in the room and set the stage and get everyone on the same page and say, we're here. Don't forget, we're here for the patient. Don't forget, we're here for the customer. Don't forget, we're here for this timeline goal. And they do that very well. Another thing advisors do is they make suggestions and recommendations from their point of view. So informers will say, here's the data, here's 3 takeaways. Advisors will say, here's the data, and you don't have to do this, but if I were in your shoes, here's what I recommend you do. And here's how you could apply this in your situation.
Yeah, that is definitely a shift. It's a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just going to say, when I talk to senior leaders, they're looking for advisors. And people don't necessarily believe me. They're like, oh, our leadership doesn't want me to tell them what to do. But every time I go to the C-suite and I say, would you like to hear their perspective and their recommendations and what budget numbers they think you should go with? And do you want to hear that information every time they tell me yes? We'd love to hear that information, but we can't pull it out of them. So the person that's able to do that with humility and within the context of everything that's happening within the organization is a valuable person.
Yeah, I love that. I want to get into that a little bit more in our next section. But before we do, I'd love to talk a little bit of process with you. So
Okay.
I imagine that you have to create a really safe space to work with people to do this kind of work, right? You're asking people to be really vulnerable. We've talked about asking them to be engaging in something that they might be quite uncomfortable with. How do you create that safe space? And as a follow-up, how do you use your own communication skills to like actually give feedback, which is probably one of the hardest parts of the job, I imagine.
Yeah. So how to create safe space? It's interesting because I have people on a regular basis say, this feels like therapy when we're meeting one-on-one. And I hesitate at that because that's not the goal. I'm not trained in that way. So I don't want to be liable for that. But I appreciate what they're referring to. I hear them saying, you've created space in which I feel like I can be honest.
Yeah.
And one of the ways I try to do that is to share my own challenges. There are so many times where I come in as the communication expert and I feel like I'm falling on my face. And then I have this mental battle of, you're the communication expert and you said that? You did it that way? Like, how could you be the communication expert and still have these struggles? And so I'm honest that I think communication is a journey without an end, that we're always growing, we're always developing. I love to bring up examples of whether it's Barack Obama in his early years being incredibly nervous or not doing well as a law student or community organizer early in his career, or if it's Steve Jobs, incredibly nervous backstage, or Dr. Brene Brown is someone who's been incredibly honest about how nervous she is when she has to speak in front of crowds. The story goes that John Lennon threw up backstage before every concert. So,
oh my gosh, I did not know that.
I don't know if that's urban legend, but I'm just going to believe that it's true.
Yeah.
It makes me feel better. So I like to say that it's true. So all of you bring up those things and normalize the anxiety that comes with communication or being unsure or feeling like you failed, it's amazing how people will open up.
Yeah. Yeah. And it goes to show, I think this is something I so often think about, that when we are in a business context, we can recognize as consumers that we buy lots of stuff and do things for our feelings, right? Because we just feel like it, or we want to, or power of persuasion. Sometimes I think in a business context, we pretend like we all became robots and we only act logically and make like the best possible choices and are devoid of all emotion. And it's just so not true.
Yeah.
I think this is a good example of like needing to bring in that emotional piece and that vulnerability in order to actually connect and do the work you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is we don't make decisions based on data all the time. We make them based on emotion and whether or not we feel like we're connecting with people and whether or not we like them. And there's so many times I'll work with somebody one-on-one and they're fun and they're engaging and we laugh together and we have a good time. And then they get up on a stage and they're a different person. They're wooden, their facial expression goes blank, and all that emotion and engagement it has disappeared. So we have to bring some of what they already have in their one-on-one conversations to the stage. And when people start to do it, they realize, oh, this doesn't make me less professional. It actually increases my executive presence when people feel like they like me. And so that's a battle that we all face. But I hear what you're saying, that change from being a person to being a professional.
Yeah.
I think the two should mix a little bit more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So last piece on this, I'm curious, like, what happens if you're, someone's doing a dry run of a presentation for you and like inside you're just kind of, holding your head in your hands. How do you approach feedback? Is it the technical, some of the things you talked about, like the filler words, or do you really just focus on kind of internal mindset and let the rest of it be?
Everything has a tipping point. So take filler words. There's research that shows if you have 0 filler words, you end up becoming someone that is hard to connect with because you don't sound natural. Mm-hmm. So some filler words could actually be a good thing, but there is a tipping point. If they take over, that's a challenge. So if we need to give feedback to someone in that case, this is somewhere where I've changed over the years. I've had to embrace the mindset that the most helpful thing I can do is to be honest and be direct with respect. It's actually the kindest, nicest thing I can do if I've created this safe environment to be direct while being respectful. And the model that I've adopted is actually something I've learned from Dr. Eileen Habelow at Leadership Link, where I've done a lot of facilitating with that group over the years. And she uses a model she calls IOI. And the first I stands for intent. Hey, this is my intent. I'm going to give you some feedback that may be hard to hear, but I'm saying it because I believe it's going to make you a more effective speaker. And then the O is observation. Here's what I've observed. So not you sound unprofessional. That's a judgment. But the observation is in that 5-minute speech, you used 57 filler words. That's what I observed. The impact of that, and then the last I is impact. The impact of that is you may not sound like the authority you want to sound like unless we get rid of some of those filler words. So my intent is to say something to you to make you a better speaker and be helpful. I'm doing this because I like you and I want you to succeed. My observation is you said this many filler words. The impact of that is it's hurting your authority from the front of the room. Mm-hmm. And then I leave it. And I ask a question and I say, so what do you think we should do about that? And I find when you're able to say it in that sort of pattern and do it from a place where you're trying to be kind and helpful, feedback is often received very well. Yeah.
And I think being able to receive feedback in that spirit, especially when it's given so thoughtfully, is an important skill for all of us. I know certainly we've had to develop some pretty tough skin around receiving feedback and having conversations about feedback. Everyone has, right? Whether it's in our professional lives or our personal lives.
Absolutely. I don't know about you, but my whole life is just getting feedback surveys from workshops or keynotes that I do. And so or even when I was a professor and I was teaching at the university at the end of the semester, getting all those student feedback surveys. And so you have to learn not just how to give it, but how to take it too, and apply it. It sounds like you with your clients, similar thing.
And I think I really like what you said about direct with respect. That's something that we're really keen on, is like it's respectful in both ways, right? Really thinking about where that other person is coming from. And I say sometimes you got to run feedback through your own little internal translator and say, they're worried about this. It came out like that.
Right.
But we think, we're going to work we all want the same thing. And I think that can be helpful too, is remembering that you're all aligned toward the same goal ultimately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. I'd love to switch now. So every episode we do a segment called One Big Idea. And this is a chance for us to really go deep on one specific topic. It's an important part of the podcast for me because this is what I love doing, but I get to talk with subject matter experts, is get into the details, get into the nitty gritty, really pull something apart. So we talked about a topic in advance today, and it was this idea, this phrase that was wonderful about how the clients you work with are stitching across the seams of the organization. Can you explain a little bit about what that means just as a phrase, and then why it really matters? I think so often we think of speaking as something that's very external and public facing.
So that phrase comes from a LinkedIn post I read a few months ago. And it was by a gentleman that I don't know named Kevin Fitzgerald, who's a chief scientific officer. And he said the number one trait that he looks for when he's hiring someone is their ability in their communication to stitch across the seams of the organization. And I love that phrase. I've been thinking about it now for months.
Yeah.
Because it was a great way in 3 words to describe exactly what I'm trying to help people do. And when I first started working in biotech and pharma about 10 years ago, my father-in-law was actually on the business side at a biotech before he retired. And he used to come home and in our conversations, at dinner or whatever, he would say, these scientists and researchers, they don't understand business. And I know the scientists in his companies would look at these business people and they would say, these business people, they don't understand science. And there was that natural conflict or divide, I guess, between those two sides. So when I started working in biotech, I said to myself, okay, there's business and there's science, and I need to help the two figure out how to communicate effectively. What happened is I remember being in a conference room in Waltham, Massachusetts, and I was talking about where these divides happen in our companies. And a woman raised her hand and she said, it's not just business and science. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I'm a biologist on a team of chemists. And when the chemists speak, I have no idea what they're saying.
It is like a different language sometimes. I mean, honestly.
Yeah,
wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
And a couple months later, I was sitting in a conference room in Watertown, Massachusetts, and I said, I had a woman say she's a biologist on a team of chemists, and when the chemists speak, she has no idea what they're saying. And a guy raised his hand in the back. I'll never forget. It was a packed conference room, and he was sitting on a table in the back, and I wasn't even sure he was paying attention. And he raised his hand and he said, well, I'm an analytical chemist, and when the synthetic chemists speak, I have no idea what they're saying. And so now over the years, I continue to ask the question, do you understand each other? And when I ask that question in the room, all these people in these companies that pretend that they're understanding each other and all the acronyms and jargon, they will honestly say, no, there's a lot of times we have no idea what the other person is saying. So the communicator that can stitch across the seams and say what it is they need to say so that the supply chain people understand and the research people understand and the HR professionals understand and the finance people understand, that is where you shine in an organization. And the challenge is academia doesn't prepare us for that. They prepare us to talk to other experts, be graded by other experts, to our peers, and that's a valuable discipline. But when you go to industry, it's got to shift if projects and timelines are going to get delivered.
Yeah, I love that. And it's super interesting. So there was a period of time where we had a lot of specialization in precision machining. So it's a custom manufacturing, a lot of smaller shops. They're known as job shops. And when we took on new clients, one of the biggest complaints we heard about prior work was people didn't understand who we were really talking to. So either it was way too basic for our audience, who they were mostly selling to engineers, or it was calibrated for our peers and we're not selling to other machine shops. So that idea just reminded me that idea of like talking to your peers and understanding the difference between that and actually speaking to an audience that may still be very educated, maybe sophisticated. It's not the same as a classroom of third graders necessarily, but there's still this need to really calibrate based on who you're talking to, calibrate, as we've talked about a little bit before, the message. I'm curious, like, are these opportunities, as you said, academia doesn't necessarily prepare you for this. Are these opportunities that people expect as part of their roles? Is it the people who are able to step up and kind of work cross-functionally in this way? Or is it just this is kind of a normal part of doing business, but not necessarily built into your job description?
Yeah, say more about that. Are you asking how people feel when they step into industry and step into this reality?
I think like when these needs come up to communicate with other departments, other audiences within an organization, are those things that, the biologist expects to have to do, or is that sort of like an unanticipated part of their role that they've not really been trained for?
That's a good question. And I think for some people, they go into industry understanding these dynamics, and some people are quite surprised, especially when they're looking to get promoted. That they have leaned on their technical expertise for so long and found great success in leaning into their technical expertise. It led to an advanced degree, it led to good grades, it led to a job offer, however it's taken them. The fact that they've leaned into their technical expertise has served them quite well. But then there comes a ceiling where if they're going to be able to advance in their career, they need to start learning how to communicate in a different way. And sometimes people figure that out when they're going to management. Sometimes people are all the way to the C-suite until they realize I've got to start working on this and figure out how I'm going to communicate across the leadership team or at the conference or to our customers or to our third-party vendors. So at some point, I think the light bulb goes on, but many of us don't realize until we get to that moment that this is a reality. This is something we're going to have to work on.
I think it's probably obvious to us in a lot of ways what may happen if you have people in the organization pretending to literally understand each other who don't. But can you talk about what you've seen, either the problems that creates or the positive outcomes when people do start communicating more effectively?
Yeah. And I'm sure you see this too all the time as you're working with clients on the written word. But I remember one time a chief medical officer came to me and he said, we have this biostatistician who is fantastic. And he worked at one of the top universities in Beijing, and I'm so glad he's in our company. I know that I need information that he has, and I need his recommendation in order for our cohort, our clinical trial to move forward. But when he speaks, I have no idea what he's saying. And I worked with the biostatistician, I worked with the chief medical officer, and going back and forth, this gap, the company was trying to make big decisions, and they knew they needed to understand the information that this biostatistician had in order to make the decision. But it was not getting presented in a way that the leadership team felt like they had what they needed to move forward. So that's one way it can work. And then a gentleman that I worked with just this spring and into the summer, he's a pharmacologist, and he was sitting on a global project team. And he would come to the team and present his data, and the team knew they needed the data in order to make decisions as a team. But the way it was being presented was it was technically precise, but it was being presented in a way that it was almost like it was in a different language. And so they weren't getting what they needed. And after working together, the head of the project team emailed me and said, we are finally getting what we need in order to make the decisions. So it's not that the person isn't bright, and it's not that the people in the project team are not smart people. It's just they're speaking different languages.
Yeah. And
so appreciating that and figuring out how to stitch across the seams, it solves those business problems and decision-making problems.
How do you help the technical experts let go of some of the details and really kind of refine a message down to what's key to that audience. That's one of the things we encounter when working with SMEs is, they want to include everything because I think, especially folks who tend to be more analytical, I am one of them, want all the context in there. They want to make sure you understand all the caveats and the nuances and the exceptions and everything, when really it's most often that kind of core message that would be more effective. How do you help people let go of that and say, actually, less is more here, or simpler is better?
Yeah, well, sometimes that's a hard thing to do. But my guess is you've experienced that as well.
Yes.
The most effective thing that I've found is there's an old Steve Jobs quote. It's from 1997, the Worldwide Developers Conference. He said, what I've learned, and he's referring back to the fact that he was fired from his own company and now is back as the CEO for the second time. He said, one thing I've learned is you can't start with technology and figure out where you're going to sell it. You have to start with the customer and work backward to the technology. And he said, I've made this mistake 1,000 times. So what I help people do is I say, listen, I know that you have these 10 things that are incredibly important from your perspective that need to be communicated. But let's start with the people you're talking to. Who are they? What's their knowledge base? What problems are they trying to solve? And once we get clear answers to that, now let's go back to these 10 things and say, what 3 are actually helpful? What 3 matter to them? And what I find is there are quite a few subject matter experts who know what they're doing isn't working, but they don't know how to fix it.
Yeah.
So, the pharmacologist that I worked with, he knew he was going into his project teams and delivering all this data, and that everybody was checked out. He could see it, he could feel it, but he didn't know how to fix it. And so once we did this process of starting with the listener and working back to the data, and he went with, hey, here's the 2 things you need to know based on what I'm seeing. And he saw the eyes light up in the meeting, and he heard people say, thank you, that's really helpful. Then he was hooked. Then he was willing to do it again and again and again. So walking people through that process, I feel like the experts end up feeling lighter when they go into the communication, because they don't hold the weight of having to say all 10 of those very detailed things.
Right.
They're just coming in with 2 things, and that frees them up to communicate more effectively as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, this is very tactical, but coming off of that, does that approach impact even how you put together or help someone put together like their slides, for example, for a presentation? Are those also more pared down, simple, can be passed on, but not jam-packed of detail? I'm just curious how, because obviously slides are not always present, but probably often present in what you're doing, presenting data and such, probably not just rattling off a list of numbers. How does your approach kind of change the supplementary material?
It's a good question, and it's a big question. But I think the principle is I'm going to look at a slide with all of its bullets and all of its numbers and say, what matters most here? What matters most? And almost always the person can say to me, well, it's this part of the graph, or it's these numbers in the table. And so the question then becomes, well, how do we highlight those things and get rid of everything else? It's about bringing focus to the slide. And once you answer the question, like what matters most, then you're able to take other things away. We worry that if we take those other things away, that people are going to have questions. And so, but it's amazing when you do take those things away and focus attention, how those questions never get asked because you didn't put the detail in front of them that prompted these questions from left field. So what matters most? Where can we focus, and how can we get rid of everything else? And then the biggest change that I often help people with on their slides is I want to change their headings to headlines. So most slides have a heading at the top. They say CL592 project update. But I often say to people, if you were the editor of the New York Times and you had to splash a headline about the Titanic across the front page, you're not going to write Titanic update. Like Titanic journey report. Like that's no good. That doesn't help your audience. So what are you going to write? You're going to write iceberg seeks Titanic. The unsinkable ship sinks. So what is the headline? It's CL935 is on time and under budget. It's CL935 is progressing in unexpected ways. Like, what is the headline? Put that at the top of the slide, because that frames then how the entire rest of the slide is interpreted. If I just put CL595 project update, I haven't helped my listener at all frame what I'm about to show them. So the biggest change we make is how can we shift those headings to headlines? And then how can we put the details that tell the right story underneath it?
And I can really see how that also ties into that shift in model that you talked about before, of not being the informer, but more having that point of view. Yeah.
Yeah.
So last question I have on this is, I think industry expertise, particularly, we're seeing a lot of call for that right now in the job market in general. I think when there's a tighter job market, industry expertise, like people can, people who are hiring can be pickier. So this is something I deal with as well. I am not a molecular biologist or any kind of chemist or a statistician, and I don't think you are either. So how do you navigate not speaking somebody's language and still being an effective facilitator that helps them really transform their communication style?
It's a good question. I'm curious, are there things that you find yourself doing, Kristen, in those spaces that are effective?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think that the biggest thing for me is it's two parts. One, being prepared enough to have a good conversation, and that's just basically doing my job well. I don't want someone to come in and explain 101 to me. I want to have learned 101 on my own so I can really dig into the deeper details. But I think the second thing is really an ability to treat even high-level executives as a peer on some level and have the confidence to ask questions and ask for a simpler explanation. And I was thinking about that because I was thinking about all those audience members saying we don't understand our colleagues, and yet not everyone has the confidence to say, can you re-explain that to me? Can you break that down a little more simply? That doesn't happen that often. And I think for me, the confidence to go in and say, I don't really know what you're talking about and I need it. And your audience doesn't either, right? So I may be I'm not in their exact role, but I'm somewhat of a proxy of telling you we kind of need to take the complexity down and be able to explain it more simply. So I think that's, for me, it's being willing to ask questions and kind of have as long as I'm prepared, there are no dumb questions. And I don't like to leave an interview with a client or an expert with anything that I've just sort of nodded along and taken notes. If that's the case, I'm going to go back and say, we really need to revisit this so I can understand it, because we can't write about it until I can understand it.
Yeah. I love that. For me too, having the humility to be able to ask and say, so what do you mean by CMC? Yeah. What do you mean by NDA? Do you mean non-disclosure agreement, or do you mean new drug application? Because I've made that mistake when I thought I knew which one they meant, and they meant something else. So it's having the humility to just ask the question. I have yet to have anyone get mad at me or feel like I can't help them in their communication because I asked them to explain what they meant when they used an acronym or a technical term.
Yeah.
I really haven't. And one of the things that people will say to me is, I love that you're not an industry expert, because if I can say this in a way that you can understand, then I know my audience will understand and be able to comprehend it. And so I agree with you. It is on me to learn some things. And after doing this for a decade in certain industries, I've learned enough just to be dangerous with different functions and how it all operates in the process. But the humility to ask is key. And then going in and saying, my lack of knowledge is in or technical expertise in this case is an advantage when it comes to helping people communicate more clearly. If we can get it to where I can understand what they're saying, then for sure this conference audience or this internal audience is going to be able to understand.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I agree. It's a little bit of a superpower in a way of being able to be that kind of translator or go-between. Awesome. Thanks so much. Great conversation on the one big idea here. Before we completely wrap, I would love to go into our lightning round segment. This is called The Last Word. I ask every guest the same 5 questions. I know you saw them in advance, but just go with your gut on the answers here. You ready?
Okay. I'm ready.
All right. What's your favorite word to say out loud?
Helpful.
Wow. Nice, like soft. Got that F going on in there. What's a word you know from reading but are afraid to say out loud because you're not sure how to pronounce it?
So appreciate is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Because I grew up saying appreciate, and I had someone 15 or 20 years ago say, why do you say appreciate? It's appreciate. And now I'm confused. And I never know when I go to say the word exactly how I should say it.
My husband and I are a household divided on that. I say appreciate, but he grew up with appreciate. Yep.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
one.
So I try to avoid it at all costs so that I don't cause issues.
What's one phrase or saying you wish could be retired for good?
The word basically right now, I think needs to go. I have kids that are teenagers or just about to approach the teenage years, and that word is in front of everything that they tell me. They are coming to me saying, so basically, and basically, and basically, and basically. And I just, right now, that's a word I'd love to get rid of that word.
It's the new like, huh?
It is.
Yeah.
I feel like, at least in my household, I don't know if everywhere, that's the word.
That's the one. What's a communication hill you're willing to die on?
That there is a great communicator inside of every professional.
Oh, I love that. That's so
I
inspiring.
think it is a skill that some people have not developed, but it's there if they'll work on it.
Nice. Last but not least, what's the last thing you read, heard, or watched that really stuck with you?
I'm going to go back to stitch across seams because that is the phrase that I read a few months ago that consistently works its way into my thought process and into my workshops and one-on-one coaching as I'm working with people. I love that phrase, and I think it communicates very clearly what we're trying to do.
It's so satisfying when you land on something, some little bit of messaging, wherever it came from, and you're just like, this is it. I can hold on to it. I can say it 1,000 times in public. Like, it really resonates. That's awesome.
Agreed.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. If our listeners want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
The best place is to find me on LinkedIn. You search Brian Krogh, Krogh, or you can go to briankrogh.com and learn more about what I do there.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great having you on the show.
Thanks so much, Kristen. I had a blast being here.
That's it for this episode of Expertly Said. We're produced by Every Little Word, a boutique content and communications agency. If you liked what you heard, you know what to do. Subscribe, share the episode with a colleague, or leave us a review. If you want to connect with me directly, please do. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search Kristen Sweeney. Thanks for listening. Talk soon.